Okay, so hello everyone and welcome to my presentation, how to help translators to help your app. And my name is Tuomas Hietala and let's see. Sorry, I have trouble changing slides. Okay, here goes. So a few words about myself. I've done translating free and open source software for a few years now, maybe, I don't know, since 2017 or something. So not that long, but I've done quite a lot of translations for various apps, mostly in LibreOffice, but also many others. And I recently became a member of the Document Foundation, which are the makers of LibreOffice. But for clarity, I should say that I'm speaking only for myself here and not on behalf of any organizations. So these are my personal views. And some motivation. Why is it important to have good translations? Well, if you're creating software for end users, you probably would want to have it translated. And a well-translated app is understandable, of course, but it also makes a good impression. And conversely, a poorly translated app will make a bad impression, usually. If you have your app translated to a local language, it may be deployed in the public sector or other large deployments, large corporations. If your app is not translated, it may not be eligible for that kind of deployments. And of course, when if your app is well translated, people can recommend it to their friends and family without reservations. So what can you do to make this happen if you're a developer or a community coordinator? So first thing is to give credit to the translators. You would think this is kind of obvious, but in many cases it's really not, unfortunately. Or it's better to say in some cases. Mostly these projects get this right, but unfortunately not always. Attribution is kind of a cornerstone for free and open source software. If you're donating your time to some project, at least you get credit if you don't get money. And with code, it almost universally works like this, but with translations, not always. So what is a good attribution? Well, a name in the credits, it's fine, it's good, but it's better if I have something more specific which I can point to. For example, if you're a programmer, you have a GitHub or GitLab profile probably, which you can point to. You can put a link in your CV or something. So this is good also for translators. Let's say if I want to apply for grants or jobs, it's good to have something which I can point to that I made this. These are my translations. You can have a look at how good I am at translating. There's also legal angle, although I must make a disclaimer here that I'm not a lawyer. But if you don't know who made the translations to your app, you don't know who holds the copyrights. So I think it's also legally important, or from a licensing perspective, that you know who your translators are and can attribute them properly. So next one. Offer modern infrastructure. So there's when it comes to code, there's a kind of general trend in free and open source developments. The trend is moving from patches and mailing lists and Bugzillas and so on to integrated platforms like GitHub and GitLab. So the question is, why shouldn't translators also have this kind of integrated platforms? And luckily there are options for that. I think the current contenders are Weblate, which is used by Fedora, LibreOffice, OpenSUSE, Megatus. Another actively developed platform is Pontoon, which is used and developed by Mozilla. And there used to be a couple more open source solutions, Pootle and Zanata, but they're not being actively developed right now. And then there are a couple of proprietary alternatives also, Crowdin and Transifex, which many free and open source projects also use. The benefits of this kind of integrated platform are easy user interface, SSO support, integrated glossaries, comments, user profiles. Although here I must say that Transifex doesn't have a very useful user profiles, which is a kind of a negative if you would like to apply for grants or jobs or something. You can't really prove what you did with the Transifex user profile. So I wouldn't recommend that for that reason. There are some objections which I've heard in some discussions around these kind of platforms. The first one is it's too easy, anyone can do anything, and the quality will suffer. And there's some truth to this objection. I think it can be a problem that some people do very low effort kind of drive-by translations. But I think kind of software development skills, kind of command line wizardry is not necessarily a good proxy for translation skills. So you want to set some kind of a quality bar, but setting it by requiring software development knowledge is not necessarily good solutions. You can put some access control there, of course, and try to get the quality control in other ways. And I'll return to this point later. The second objection is that these are slower than native code. Yes, can be, but at least Weblate gives the option to use offline tools also, so you can download the translations from Weblate and then use any tool what you like and then upload them back again. Number 3, be responsive. Sometimes translators can have questions which the developers can answer better because they know the code, they have written it. So if the translators have questions, please try to answer them as a developer, because it can save a lot of time. It's good to have some kind of mailing list or forum for general discussion. And if you're using Weblate or something, the comments there are good for discussing specific translations or strings. If, of course, the developers will respond. And I think it's better to take the attitude that you don't outsource the translations to some nebulous community. You invite translators to a project. And I think sometimes the community can be kind of nebulous because it doesn't really exist as a community properly. Sometimes it can be that there are just random people who never really communicate with each other. So if you want to know what it's like, you can imagine Wikipedia without the talk page. So if there are some differences between the editors, the only way to settle it is the kind of edit war. And this is not really what you want. You want people to communicate. So please encourage the formation of language communities and give them the infrastructure that they need. And you have to be aware that if you have a very small project, it might be better to cooperate with some other projects, because a very small project may not be able to attract a very large language community, if at all. Even bigger projects can have problems with small languages, at least with this. Then there's a question of trust. And in general, I think you should verify, but trust. So how can you trust that random people on the internet will translate your app correctly to a language you don't necessarily speak yourself? Yes, maybe you shouldn't always trust them too. If you're running a business and your business depends on people having a good first impression on your app or website, then maybe you should hire a professional translator and not trust that random people on the internet will make such a good translation that it will make a good impression on people. Or maybe, I don't know, if you have some security-related app which is supposed to protect journalists or something, then it could be a problem if no one reviews the translation. It's just random people translating the stuff with varying quality. But still, if you want to kind of open it for everyone, then at least if you credit your translators properly, they have kind of a skin in the game. Their reputation depends on it, if they care about that. And if you have a proper community, then that's probably more trustworthy than just random people doing random things. There's something you can verify, sort of, too. Tools like Weblate have automated checks, which are useful to catch some mistakes, at least. But I think I must emphasize that someone who actually understands the language must have the final word. You shouldn't let automatic checks to override people, but use them to help people. Next is provide context. So the problem for translating UI strings in most software is that the strings are often really short and ambiguous. There are words like link, group, and list. They can be either words or either nouns or verbs. So unless you have some kind of context, you don't know how to translate them correctly. Also, words like advanced or connected can refer to one or many things, or even something like page style, that can refer to one page or all pages. Again, you have to know the context, what it really refers to. So tracking down the right context can be quite difficult and time consuming. So it's really good if developers can help translators by providing some kind of context strings. So if there's some tag like tooltip or menu item, that's good. And it's even better if you have longer explanations for more difficult strings. Even a little bit helps a lot. Next one, you should avoid hard coding your assumptions into the strings. So, for example, English grammar. If you rely on the English sentence structure, that may not be applicable to every language. So instead of using very inflexible structure where you have to put a certain word in a certain place, you should rather try to use variables, which the translator can then rearrange as they see fit. But even with variables, you might, or translators of some languages might still encounter problems or kind of have to work around a bit. Because, for example, Finnish uses lots of inflections. So even the variables are not really ideal and you kind of have to work around them a bit sometimes. But then there's not really an easy solutions here for that kind of languages. Although there's a project Fluent by Mozilla, which seems quite promising, which allows more flexibility for translators. I haven't tried it myself, but it could be a solution here. With regard to plural forms, you can use getText to get the right amount of plural forms. Because they are not always like one or many, as they are in English. They can be more of them in various languages. And of course, date and time formats vary, calendars vary, collation rules vary, writing direction, average length of words. Sometimes there's a problem with strings where the developers who speak English have left only very little space for the strings, but in some languages the words might be longer and need more space. Okay, here's some good news for chance. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, and should not, because a lot of hard localization work has been done for you already. You should make use of these tools that someone has already made for you, like CLDR, the Common Local Data Repository, for example, dates, times, names of languages, names of countries. You should use getText or something like that. If you need some kind of localized citations, you could use the citation style language. There's also libnumbertext for numbers and currencies. Yes, use them, please. Something you also should consider doing is encouraging fixing issues at the source. Because your UI strings and documentation might not be written by technical writers who are very fluent in English or UX experts. They might be just written by programmers who may not speak English as their first language or fluently at all. and it's certainly not their fault. They should be doing what they're good at, which is programming. But as translators, we can help, because translators are people who read through the strings a lot and try to understand them. So if there are some strangeness in the strings, then translators can notice that and report the issues, often at least. So please try to make it easy for the translators to report or fix the issues in the source strings. This way, you could save work for everyone and help fix the issues once and for all, instead of having every translator to work around them. And finally, consider sustainability. Well, as some of you might remember, around the turn of the millennium, there was a kind of hype around free and open source software that if you just throw your code on the internet, then thousands of volunteers will spring forth and tirelessly improve it for you. Well, in around 20 years later, we have found out that no, maybe that's not always what's going to happen. And that's not always going to happen with translations either. So I think translators can be a lot like maintainers of code in many respects. For example, applications like LibreOffice are really huge in terms of the UI strings and documentation and everything. There's about 100,000 words in the UI of LibreOffice and 500,000 words in the help, and I don't know how many words in the user guides. So really, that's if you're trying to improve the translation systematically, then that's a lot like maintaining software. So there are some kind of challenges, and something we as the free and open source software community should do is try to think of ways how could we improve sustainability for translators also. So what can you do? Well, at least give credits, give recognition that these people are an important part of the community, your project. And also something we should try to explore is to try to open up new sources of funding. I think typically the idea that people could translate software for public benefits is not really on the radar of most grant makers, like foundations or governments. But maybe we should try to put it there. And I don't know, maybe we could ask also our friendly multi-billion dollar software companies, but I don't know what would come out of that. But if someone has really good ideas on how we could do this, then I'm interested in hearing that. And I think that was all. So thank you. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Tuomas. Yes, there does seem to be a couple of questions in the shared notes. The first one is, does weblate.org integrate with GitLab?
Yes, I think it does. Yes, it integrates with GitHub and GitLab.
Great.
And actually, there's even an
Sorry.
the kind of integration that it can commit if you make changes to translations in Weblate, it can commit them automatically to Git and credit you as the translator. So this is a kind of very specific form of attribution down to like a single string. So I like that.
Okay. The next question is a bit of a long one. Here we go. I started in FOSS contributors doing translations around 2000, but I think the barrier to start was very high. Basically, only someone with a computer science background could do it. Do you think the barrier of entry is still high or better nowadays?
I think it depends on the project. If the project is, if it requires you to send patches to mailing list or something, then yeah, it could be kind of difficult if you don't know anything about version control or software development. But if the project uses something like Weblate, then it's quite a bit easier. You need to make an account, or maybe you can use your GitHub or Google or some account like that, and log on to Weblate, and it's relatively easy to start translating. Of course, it depends on the size of the project also. So something small is easier to get started with than something huge like LibreOffice.